This is Professor Mark Schwartz, and welcome to Anthropology 215, The Origins of Civilization. In this first video, I just kind of wanted to introduce myself, give you a little bit of my background, and a little bit of understanding of what we're going to do in the course. Go over the syllabus a little bit and give you an idea of what's expected for the semester, and then the next few videos we'll launch right into some of the material. Okay, well, let me just tell you a little bit about archaeology and how I came to be an archaeologist and some of my interests in archaeology. So when I was a kid, I was interested in history, especially medieval history. The little I knew about archaeology was that it dealt with history, with digging up sites, with finding cities and treasures and things like that. I was fascinated by Heinrich Schliemann, who excavated Troy. I was able to visit in middle school and high school some of the Native American archaeological sites in the Southwest, such as Mesa Verde, you could see here, which is in Colorado. But I didn't really understand what archaeology was, and I didn't really understand what archaeologists did until I actually got to college. And while I was in college, I was at a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. They didn't have a lot of archaeology courses, but down the road was the University of Pennsylvania, which did have a lot of archaeology classes. So I would hop on the train some days during the week in order to take a class at the University of Pennsylvania. They had a really excellent archaeology and anthropology museum, and I took a class basically like the one you're taking, Origins of Civilization, with this guy Bernard Wales. You can see some of the things that they had in the museum. The class was in the museum. During breaks in the class, I would walk around the museum. And this is when I realized what archaeology actually is, what it does, and how it's a little bit different than what many people think about archaeology. Archaeology is not just digging for things and gathering new information. It's not just adding more detail to what we already know about ancient civilizations. It was in this class that I learned that archaeology is really focused on big questions, right? Big research questions. And as we don't, archaeologists don't dig just to dig. Archaeologists dig to answer questions, and the questions that archaeologists are interested in are some of the really large questions in the social sciences, such as how did we evolve? How does that impact our health today? Why do we live in societies where a few people have most of the wealth and power and most of the population does not? As compared to the kinds of societies that we lived in for most of human history, which were small groups of maybe 30 people, where most people had roughly the same amount of power. How did we go from small societies like that to large-scale societies? How do societies work? Can we compare societies throughout the world? These were some of the big picture questions. And one of the questions that was brought up in the class that I was particularly interested in was, how did civilizations begin? I thought that was a really interesting question, and it was a question that archaeologists were looking at in different areas of the world and trying to come up with answers. So I thought, if I become an archaeologist, that's something that I would like to study. So in undergrad, I worked at several sites. This is a site in Arizona, which was ancestral to the modern Hopi Native Americans who live there. This is a site in Israel. It's a biblical city called Tel Hatzor, mentioned in the Bible. This is a cave site also in Israel that I worked in, which had Neanderthal remains in it. Then after I graduated, I went to graduate school at Northwestern University, and my PhD was on this archaeological site, which was it was an ancient trading site, and it was from the very earliest civilization, Mesopotamia, and it was part of the first colonial trading system. Not the first trade, but the first time that people from Mesopotamia set up a colony somewhere else in order to trade. So I was particularly interested, and it was on the Euphrates River. So here I am on the Euphrates. Most of you probably remember from sixth grade that Mesopotamia means between the rivers. It's between the Tigris and the Euphrates. That's mainly the area that I was interested in, which had the first civilizations, and we're going to talk about Mesopotamia in the class. This is the beginnings of writing in Mesopotamia, and you can see some of these strange idols. So I was really interested in the very first civilizations, and from there I've moved on to other things. I've worked in other areas. This is in Turkey. I've worked in Turkey. I'm also doing archaeology locally, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so most of you probably know, and this is in the syllabus as well. You'll be able to refer to the syllabus on Blackboard. Everything in the class I will put on Blackboard or videos on YouTube, but I'm going to be as clear as possible about where things are. Most of you guys know that this fulfills two general education requirements: historical perspectives and global perspectives. So we look at things throughout time, but we also look at them comparing different cultures throughout the world, and that really gives us an insight into some of the big questions that we're going to look at in the class. This is part of the liberal arts core, as you guys know. I think liberal arts is an important foundation for learning for the rest of your life, because when you graduate from college, you may not have all of the knowledge or facts that you need to know, but what a liberal arts education, I think, provides people is the ability to ask the right questions to get the answer to the things, the answer to the questions that you have, right? So no one is going to have all the facts at their memory, but if you have critical thinking skills from a liberal arts education, you know how to get the answer, which I think is important. Feel free to email me at any time. My email is schwamar@gvsu.edu. This is also on the syllabus. I wish it was shawarma, but it's not. Like most of you, I didn't get to pick my email. It's just the first 5 letters of my last name and the first 3 letters of my first name. So what are some of the big questions we're going to look at? Well, we're going to look at some of the fundamental questions of human history. And one of the big changes in human history was the change from hunting and gathering to farming, to agriculture. This happened throughout the world independently in different areas. One of the questions that archaeologists ask is how and why did this happen in different areas of the world? Because this had a very fundamental change on human history, but also human health. We're also going to look at how did we go from societies of 25 to 30 people to societies of hundreds of thousands of people living in cities with kings and priests and people like that. How did we develop what we call quote-unquote civilization, which I guess is better termed a state society? How did that happen throughout the world? Again, that happened independently as well. And then the other question that we're going to focus on is, why did these different civilizations collapse at different points in history? Now, as I was teaching this class over the years, I wanted to try and make the class more and more relevant to people who are not anthropology majors, and try and show the way anthropology is useful to people in other fields. So anthropology has been very, very useful in looking at human health, comparing the health of people who live, let's say, a hunting gathering lifestyle to people who are agricultural, to people who live in the West with a diet focused or at least a high percentage of processed foods, right? Why don't hunters and gatherers face the same kinds of diseases that people in, let's say, Western Europe and North America face? Those are big, important, fundamental questions that anthropology helps us understand. How do large societies exist in different areas of the world? How have they been organized? And ultimately, why do some of these civilizations collapse? This is a question that I've had my Anthropology 215 students look at for many years now, I think over 10 or 12 years. And it's, ironic that it's become even more of a relevant question right now with what is going on with the coronavirus. So I think many of my students from last semester, I asked students to not only think about ancient civilizations, but to think about the potential causes for collapse today. And many students were able to look at, in a broad picture perspective, potential things today, such as coronavirus, and its potential to cause what we might consider a collapse of a society. Okay, so what do I hope you'll be able to do by the end of the class? Well, describe the range of different cultures throughout the world, understand the world outside of Western culture, think critically about historical process, right? So compare and contrast different cultures and civilizations, understand how they work, have a critical eye when you're analyzing these cultures, able to do research and able to give an oral presentation. So those are going to be some key parts of the class.